It played a big role in winning for workers basic workplace rights. The Ludlow strike was basically a failure because it got broken up as a result of the massacre, and then the union could no longer support the strikers when they were out on strike. So it was technically a failure, but it made a big impression on people nationally.
John D. Rockefeller Jr. received the Colorado Iron and Fuel Company from his father, John Rockefeller, for his birthday in the early 1900s. The company is composed of over 900 workers. The 900 workers were made up of 19 nationalities and 36 different languages. Rockefeller Jr. created this diversity intentionally. He sent recruiters into foreign countries including Italy, Mexico, Yugoslavia, Greece, and other southern European countries. The purpose of this was to make sure that they couldn't communicate and form a strike.
The workers were forced to work in brutal, inhumane conditions within the mine. All the money that the miners received could only be used in company stores. In addition, the workers were forced to live with their families in company-owned houses, which were really just unstable wooden shacks. The mine was insecure and dangerous due to the constant collapsing of tunnels and unexpected explosions.
Working conditions were brutal to say the least. The deeper miners dug, the more danger increased of collapsing tunnels, gas pockets, floods, and getting trapped inside. The annual death toll in Colorado was more than any state. In addition to the danger in the mines, winter in Colorado at the time brought miserable cold and difficult transportation.
The 7 demands that the miners made were the following. Number 1, recognition of the union's right to bargain. Number 2, a 10% advance in wages on tonnage rates. Number 3, an 8-hour workday for all laborers in and around mines and at coke ovens. Number 4, pay for dead work, such as timbering, brushing, and removing rocks. Number 5, a check weighman at all mines elected by miners without interference. Number 6, the right to trade in any store and to choose lodging and a medical doctor. Number 7, enforcement of Colorado mining laws and elimination of armed mine guards.
Demands numbers 3, 5, and 7 were already protected by the Colorado laws. The union only included it to show that the mine owners had ignored them. Although all the demands were important, everyone knew that number 1 was the most important. This was the most significant so that the union could negotiate.
They had to shop at the company store. They were paid in what was called scrip, which was outlawed at the time. It's a form of currency that you could only use at the company store. They were forced to read company literature. Kids had to read from company textbooks. It was all about the company. So it was basically like a feudal organization.
Colorado Fuel and Iron Company stubbornly refused to grant them their demands and forced the workers out of their original company-owned houses, making them live in a large colony of primitive tents.
They evicted almost 13,000 miners from their homes. The miners moved into a colony of primitive tents. The colony of tents was located on land that was loaned to them by ex-miners who sympathized and supported the strikers' union. The colony was under the leadership of Louis Tikas.
Louis Tikas was a Greek organizer with the union. He was very respected by the miners. The miners lived in this colony through the winter of 1913 to 1914, which was one of the worst on record. As the tension was building, the miners dug pits underneath their tents. This was meant to protect women and children from the gunfire.
Rights and responsibilities played a huge role in the Ludlow Massacre due to the mine owners taking away the miners' rights. The rights to choose a medical doctor, safe working conditions, a normal education, and to choose where to live.
It was the mine owners' responsibility to ensure their workers safe working conditions, better pay, and to let them choose where they live. It was the workers' right as American citizens to go on strike, but they had this right taken away from them the second that the first gun fired.
A huge part of owning and running a business is the responsibility to provide workers with fair pay and safe working conditions, the responsibility that Rockefeller Jr. lacked. The Colorado Iron and Fuel Company treated their workers more like cheap animal labor than actual working humans.
They were denied every basic right that we come to take for granted today. And they were denied the right to a safe workplace, which was probably the most important, because they were dying in the Colorado mines at twice the national average for coal miners. It's got to be Mother Jones. She was a remarkable activist and, a woman who should be up there in the pantheon of American gods for what she did for working people.
If it's strike or submit, for God's sake strike. Strike or else every woman in the country will come and beat the hell out of you. Strike until the last one of you drops in your graves.
Soon after the militia arrived, Mother Jones was banned from the Coldfield, but in January she returned. General Chase told her that she would be jailed if she came back to the town of Trinidad, but she came anyway. General Chase had her put under military confinement in the San Rafael Hospital for 10 weeks. For almost another month, she was sent to a rat-infested room in the cellar of the Harfano County Courthouse.
After she was released, she headed back to Washington, D.C. to testify on behalf of the miners before a congressional committee. Then she came back to help the families cope. Without Mother Jones, the miners would have had a hard time coming together and striking.
Shortly after they were evicted from their homes, fights were breaking out periodically between miners and mine owners, so the governor sent the state militia to be peacekeepers. He put General Chase in command.
But the militia quickly sided with the mine operators. The mine operators gave the militia warm food and were very sympathetic to the militiamen.
The militia had men with guns posted all around the camp. Occasionally there would be an exchange of gunfire, but nothing too damaging.
The company had just had enough, and I should say that the militia at that time was pretty much taken over by company people. It wasn't really the Colorado, National Guard or the Colorado militia anymore.
All the tension building up between the miners and militia came crashing down on the morning of April 20th, 1914. It was 10 o'clock in the morning. Many miners were celebrating Greek Orthodox Easter at the time. That very morning, the militia opened fire at the tent colony.
Who fired the first shot still remains a mystery to this day. As bullets pelted the colony, women and children took cover in pits dug under their tents. As the massacre raged on, the militia set fire to the tents. It is said that kerosene was poured over the tents initially to set them on fire. In one pit, 2 women and 11 children suffocated under a burning tent.
The men grabbed their guns and ran to the railroad to defend the colony. Others took shelter elsewhere, while some guided others to safety during the bloodbath. The day of the Ludlow battle, a chum and myself left the house of Reverend J. O. Ferris, the Episcopal minister with whom I boarded in Trinidad. For a long trip through the hills, we walked 14 miles, intending to take the Colorado and Southern Railroad back to Trinidad from the Ludlow station. Going down a trail on the mountainside just above the tent city at Ludlow, when my chum pulled on my sleeve, and at that same instant we heard shooting. The militia were coming out of Hastings Canyon and firing as they came. We lay flat behind a rock, and after a few minutes I raised my hat aloft on a stick. Instantly bullets came in our direction. One penetrated my hat. The militiamen must have been watching the hillside through glasses and thought that my old hat betrayed the whereabouts of sharpshooter of the miners. Then came the killing of Louis Tikas, the Greek leader of the strikers.
We saw the militiamen parley outside the tent city, and a few minutes later Tikas came out to meet them. We watched them talking. Suddenly, an officer raised his rifle, gripping the barrel, and felled Tikas with the butt. Tikas fell face downward. As he lay there, we saw the militiamen fall back.
And then they aimed their rifles and deliberately fired them into the unconscious man's body. It was the first murder I'd ever seen, for it was a murder and nothing less. Then the miners ran about in the tent colony. Women and children scuttled for safety in pits which afterward trapped them. Although the official number of those who died is unknown, here are some victims that are honored at the memorial.
This is the memorial located on the site of the massacre, dedicated to the men, women, and children who became victims of this bloody scar in Colorado's history.
This memorial is a National Historical Landmark. It stands tall and strong as a reminder that many hardworking miners of this event paid the ultimate sacrifice for their rights.